Presence, to say the least. Oh, sorry. We're being recorded, I just heard. I am thrilled to be, I asked Rochelle the day her book came out if she would do this, and she said yes without hesitation, and I can't tell you what that meant to us at the foundation. The foundation has been reinvigorated after some dormant years. We basically fund programming outside the scope of the budget for the library. In particular, we try to fund some larger projects and also some programming that is new to the library. And if it succeeds, then hopefully becomes part of the budget the following year. It gives Karen, our director, a chance to answer in real time the needs of our community and try some things out that can be very helpful at the library and make it a library that belongs to everybody. With that, once again, I want to thank Rochelle for coming tonight and doing this for us. By way of introduction, Rochelle was a founding art director of Ms. Magazine. She was an art director at Harper's Bazaar, at Vogue, founder of the in-house ad agency for Calvin Klein. She won the she's in the Art Directors Hall of Fame. She is here tonight because she has written a memoir, The Adventures of the Baker's Daughter. I will say on a personal note, I have known Rochelle now for years. She has been a friend of the foundation and the library, loves the library, and has been helping us brainstorm with some of our marketing questions and really helping the foundation focus on its core mission. And we're really grateful for the time she's given us. So I would like to introduce to you our author on our first night of our series, Rochelle Udell, who is muted.
Hi, everyone. And Leslie, thank you for that introduction. The foundation is a really important part of the library because it takes us beyond the actual budget for library programs that are really important to Ossining. And a big thank you to Karen and everybody, Mallory here at the library, because this is a place, I call it books and beyond books, because of the services and the classes. It's a hub for all of us here in Ossining. It's really a part of our lifetime learning. And it's a place where we can meet the opportunities and the challenges in our lives. A couple of things about tonight. I hope that there are going to be some takeaways for you tonight. And I want to start you off with 3 takeaways that help me build the stories in this site. One is the use of objects. I use objects as inspirations because they generate stories. Then the importance of asking questions. You'll find as I talk about this that a lot of questions come up. And in the process of answering those questions, I discovered a lot of things about myself. Next, I'm constantly making charts, timelines, diary entries, something to jolt me into doing the work I need to do. As Leslie mentioned, I've had a long run in publishing, all kinds of storytelling, whether it's been ink on paper, digital, film. I've had access to techniques and talent of many people who have helped me along the way and who have helped me continually create this site. This is why the memoir looks the way it looks. It's really about me wanting to play in my sandbox with my friends, and it's fun. It's fun for me to do it. It's not usually accessible to everybody, but I want to start by showing you one of my objects. And this is a cartoon from the 80s in the New Yorker, and it says, hard to read, "I'm lucky I get paid for doing what I love." And I've kept this in my purse and now in a frame for close to 40 years. So you know this already, but many of you probably are here because you're interested in your own memoirs or writing your own stories. But I want you to know that, and you probably know this already, that there are so many companies out there that can take your text, your photographs, and put them together in books and make them easily accessible. My mother-in-law has a friend by the name of Nettie Ross, who's soon to be 94 years old, and she wrote her story pulled out pictures from her family and sent it to one of the services, and has a beautiful little book for her family and for everyone to enjoy. But there are podcasts. I'm not an expert in putting together memoirs. People like Mary Carr write books about how to do it. So there are a lot of resources for you to explore, and a lot of them, actually, those books are here at the library. And for many of you tonight, I suspect that you may be in the middle of dinner time. And if you are, please enjoy what you're eating and let me know what it is. You could put it in the chat. I love food. And for people who are missing Jeopardy Live tonight, something which I love, I just want you to know I'm very grateful that you're here and spending this time with me. I hope a number of you have had a chance to at least look at Adventures, if not read at least part of it. But for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to go through it, and there's a lot there, I hope that this will trigger you to begin to take a jump into it, a taste of it to encourage you. So let me get started. As a first-generation American, libraries were a very important place for me. As a kid, I was really overwhelmed and intimidated because I didn't have the experience of books or story time at home. But that changed when I started going to public school on Story Avenue, of all places, in the Bronx, where I was introduced to the school library. It was a converted classroom, and like my regular kindergarten classroom, it was a place that had chairs that fit my 5-year-old body. And one of the important, remember I mentioned objects, one of the important objects was the chair that I had to sit in. Now, I bought a chair just like the one I had on Story Avenue off the internet because I was so motivated by it. I began to do paintings of the chairs. And here's one painting of that chair that sits in a friend's house. The chairs also motivated some stories that you'll see that are on the site. As I grew at school and in the library, the discovery of things beyond our small apartment became evident to me. But I'm very grateful to all the librarians and to all the teachers who were very patient with me. My time with you tonight, us together, is just that. I'm here for you. I hope that hearing a bit about my memoir and this project will lead you to think about your stories, because stories, the stories you tell to each other and the stories that you tell to yourself about yourself, play an important part in defining who you are. And although we can only have so much to say about what goes on in the world, the one place we can exercise our voices is in our stories. In today's New York Times, just in from this morning's New York Times, I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to see this piece, but it's a review of Salman Rushdie's new book, Victory City, and it speaks to the enduring power of language. The quote in the piece itself says, "Words are our only victors," to which I have to add objects, but I believe that the objects can be heard as well. But before I go any further, I want to introduce someone who's here with us tonight, and that's Barbara Wharton. She's a colleague and a friend and a person of many wonderful words. We've known each other since 1991 when we worked together on a corporate presentation. And over the years, we came together from time to time to work on various projects, a lot of it on the status of women and their economic power in the workplace. This project, Adventures, is built on our conversations through the scary pandemic years. And Barbara is a writer, she's an editor, and an invaluable collaborator on this very intimate project. But the thing that I admire most about Barbara is her fearless ability to tell me the truth. That's what our world needs today. People like Barbara who can tell you the truth so that you can get on with your life. You can also find some of Barbara's beautifully written personal stories in the section of the memoir, the digital memoir, in the section called As of Now. So tonight, I'm going to take you through this project, how it came together. First, I'm going to take you through my plan A, the parts and pieces, the content, the words and music, so to speak, how this project got built, examples why stories were chosen, the use of color, photography, quotes, and then I'm going to take you on to plan B, because plan A didn't work right away. Plan B does work. That's the result of what you see online. To get to Plan B, I had to go through Plan A. I love saying that because I feel like I sound like Bobby Flay when I say that, to get to Plan B. You'll get to hear about my challenges and my opportunities. And this, of course, is the condensed Reader's Digest version of the whole thing. I'm going to give you the best I can, warts and all. Then, after explaining this process with a few examples of stories that I'll tell, I want to tell you about how my perspective changed in the process of it, which to me, the experience of putting this together was wonderful because I had the opportunity to shift my perspective on things that really was stale in my life. My stories, like many of your stories, I'm sure, are universal in theme. Things like, did I fit in? Was that woman really my mother? Are we from the same family? Am I the fattest person in the room? What if people really knew the real me? I'm really a fraud. Wait till I hope they don't discover it. And if you notice that I language these things, these concerns that I have, as questions, and questions became a very important part of my life, and I got rewarded for answering questions in the fifth grade. The story I'm about to tell is actually in Adventures, and it's called 2 Gold Stars. I'm going to read it to you now. I was taught and learned critical thinking at the age of 10. Mrs. Chast, my 5th grade teacher, by the way, Mrs. Chast is the mother of Roz Chast, the cartoonist. Okay, so Mrs. Chast, my 5th grade teacher, gave a gold star for the right answer and 2 gold stars if you asked a good question. She used to say, I'd rather have a good question than a quick answer. Questioning is good for you. A question doesn't beget an answer. It inspires reflection, a pause, and some more curiosity. And this is the visual that goes with it online. So back to the basic question, why am I doing this memoir? Everyone who wants to put things together can do so in their own way. For me, the answer was to explain myself to other people first. That's what I thought. But what I ended up doing was I explained it me to me. And believe me, it was really worth going through the process. I did a lot of searching and developed a lot of clarity. As a person who's always looking for answers, I'm the est person. I'm the 6-day challenge person. I'm the multi-shrink person. I am the Sagittarian. I am the thrower of the I Ching coins. And I've worked with a number of people in high-profile places, celebrity-studded industries, and I shared with them tarot readers, hairdressers, trainers, going to various trainings and so forth. And some people thought I was a pretty fancy person, and sometimes I would think that too. Other people couldn't believe that they even let me into the room. And so I began to question, where was it that I belong? And that's how this project began, with those questions. About 4 years ago, I thought it would be fun to write a book about all the diets I was on as a way of explaining myself. The point was that I was a great success at being a failure at dieting and maintenance. I thought being thin was going to be the key to my fitting in my world, both literally and figuratively. So I started keeping a diet list. I started by making, I start most projects by making lists or making charts. And I have the actual list here. It goes on for pages of all the diets I was on. There were 25 of them at least. Some of them repeated many, many times. I need a visual construct, and this is one of the things that I thought you could take away that might be helpful, to contain an idea. I can create chaos within that construct, but I need the boundaries so at least I don't fall off the edge. In corporate life, I found that the creative team was to bring the risk-averse management team to that edge and make sure they didn't fall off. Because creative people, even though we can make lists, actually want to see what's outside the limitations. So together in a corporate life, we were able to help each other both stay grounded and see the edges. It's the best way to find innovation, which leads to product development or ideas for magazines and so forth. So it's a technique that I've used my entire life in business. Many of you out there may be chart makers. I know a few people who are watching tonight, and I know you're chart makers. I also love floor plans. I'm really excited about what HGTV does now with moving walls around in spaces. And if you're as old as I am, you might even remember when the New York Times ran and featured floor plans in their Sunday real estate section, because I would spend the morning reconfiguring the rooms and figuring out where I was going to put my furniture. Doing list making is quite a comfort for me. And it was a wonderful tool in helping putting this list together. So the next thing that I did was I called a member of the Sing Sing prison board. I was on the board at the time, and someone that I knew from publishing, Dana White. She's an excellent editor and writer, and we both shared a mutual publishing life. So she came over to the house, she looked at my list, remember this famous list, and we had a brief conversation, and she said to me, she said, Rochelle, I think there's more to your life than dieting. She pointed to my publishing life, and she mentioned that I should look further into it, which I did. So I took on her challenge, and my life intersected with quite a number of famous people, photographers, celebrities, models, writers, whatever. But I was afraid, could I even talk about them and this? So this was my first challenge that I was up against with writing this. I grew up in a family where my father parked his old DeSoto car a block away from our family bakery in Brooklyn because he didn't want to let anybody know that we had anything, because visibility, if you had visibility, if people got to see you, know more about you, you could possibly get killed. And he felt that way because he and my mother both had to leave the Ukraine and Belarus to stay alive. And this was during the pogroms in 1919 and 1920. So visibility, being a celebrity, being visible in a world like in this country, had the potential of having a death threat. So that was always omnipresent with me as I was putting all of this together. But I took Dana's advice, and I took the famous diet list, and I began to add to it. The list expanded, and I started to add to it the places that I worked at. And then I started to add the people that I worked with in those places. And then I started to add the events at the time of the people and the places. And that's when I had all of this hanging all over the place, and I called Barbara. And the writing of stories began. She wrote, I wrote, she recorded, she transcribed, we toed and froed, and conversations began, and questions started to be answered. Which stories? Well, the ones that best explain me and how I wanted to represent myself. This took a lot of time and a lot of patience. And as a person who's always worked on a deadline, whether I was a teacher and I wanted to get everything in before the bell rang, or whether I was an editor trying to meet a deadline, or a marketer trying to get to a launch on time, I now had time, and I didn't know how to use that time. I had breathing time, but I kept setting all of these artificial deadlines for everything, and it was useless. So I had to learn patience in the process of it. And it was a good lesson to happen at the time. At the same time that Barbara was writing, I was writing, we were going back and forth, I started to collect the objects that were in the stories. And at first they were diet objects. They were things like, let's see, I think I have one here. They were things like measuring tapes. I had measuring tapes because they were symbolic of the whole diet section. And they were symbols. And I found that having symbols or having visuals was an important language for today, a universal language. So how did that happen? As I mentioned previously, my mother didn't read or write any language. And when we ate as a family, we usually ended up eating what was pictured on the outside of a can. If it was on the outside of a can, like Le Sueur peas on the shiny silver can, or Chef Boyardee, if it was on the can, it was on my plate. That's how I grew up eating, especially at lunchtime. My mother was not a bad cook. She wasn't a great cook, but we ate a lot of that sort of stuff. So I learned the importance of visuals very, very early on as a language, especially for people who didn't read or write English or any other language. This paid off for me enormously when I used to work for Revlon, and I had to fill the shelves with products that had instructions and so forth. And a tenth of Walmart shoppers can't read or write English. So what were we to do? I had to begin to find a universal language for them to work within. So objects are really important. They help evoke memories and they help evoke moods. And when I started to work on books and magazines or whatever, the other thing that I wanted to do was develop a palette. Now, palettes of color were powerful things. So what did I do? I wanted to create a book that had see me colors, pay attention to me colors. So I turned to Post-its. I don't know if you could see these, the bright colors of these. And I also began to reference a book that I worked on years ago called The Works by Jim Henson. And if you open the book, guess what you get to see? Tons and tons of color on every page. So I wanted see me colors that were important. I gathered the objects up and I called the daughter of a friend of mine. My friend Christina Juarez has a wonderful, stylish daughter by the name of Sophia, who is also a brand strategist and now a young entrepreneur. And she in turn called a young advertising photographer and videographer named Lena Nicholson. And they took my palette, they took my Post-its, I had tons of Post-it colors, and they took all these objects and they hauled them to a studio and they began to do pictures of these objects. And soon objects started to lead some of the stories. So it was actually conversation that developed stories. It was objects that led to conversations. And the pictures were taken. And this is the picture of that famous measuring tape. And then my husband, Doug, who's here with us tonight, and his associate, Steve Turner, were able to take the objects, the pictures, the words, and put them together into a book, a physical book. They made layouts for a book. Doug's a very narrative thinker, so this was really great to be able to work with him, and I love to work with him. The original book was divided into 5 sections. Here's a table of contents of a book. Now, the online site Adventures has a sort of 4 sections, but this was the content. This is what the sections look like. They all were named lands. There was Motherland, which was, I was born 2,000 years ago. There was Wasteland, it cost me more to eat less, which was one of Barbara's great lines, and is now reorganized for the site. There was Wonderland, which was Right Place, Right Time, which was a story of me working. And there was Heartland, To Love and Be Loved. And finally, Tomorrowland, because I feel that my responsibility, and I felt this from the age of 50 on, that my responsibility was to the next generation of talent. I also added a lot of quotes from people I admired. Quote pages began to look like this in the book. This quote is from Alice Hoffman: "We can't unknow what we know. It's a burden that can never be given away." One of the really wonderful quotes that was in there. There are some good quotes. I'm a quote keeper. I think a lot of people are keepers of quotes. So there were objects in the book, and there were stories that went with the objects, and sometimes there were stories that didn't exactly have the objects. I want to go through a couple of the stories with you so you get a feeling for them. The first story was about this bottle of fragrance. It's called Le Bleu by Guerlain. It's a story that actually sort of triggers a sense of smell, a sense of senses, and how important they are into your life. But for me, it's a story about wanting to be someone else. And here's the story. I'm going to read it. In 1970s, I was art director of Vogue, and I had the opportunity to meet Françoise de la Renta. She was the former editor of Vogue Paris. She moved to New York with her very handsome husband, the brilliant designer Oscar de la Renta. Françoise was glamorous, feminine, strong, confident, and passionate about whatever she was working on. Personally and professionally, I'd admired and respected Françoise. My nose adored her. A split second before she walked into the room, I knew she was coming because I could smell her perfume. And it was glorious. I eventually summoned up enough courage to ask her for the name of the fragrance, and she told me, Le Bleu. And I ran out and I bought a bottle immediately. And that scent, I thought, became part of my DNA. The blue hour. It spoke to the magical time between the end of the day and the beginning of night. In the early days of my relationship with my husband, once I returned from a business trip, he pulled me aside. He confessed to me that he had missed me so much that he walked into my office to inhale my fragrance. I flirted with other fragrances over the years, but to this day, my heart, my soul, and my dreams belong to Le Bleu. Trying to define myself, that story, an object. Francois had other things I didn't have, nor was I ever going to have. She had what I call a 12 mega white smile. When she smiled, she could open her mouth and you could see, like Julia Roberts, 12 teeth across, top and bottom, 24, amazing. I went and looked in the mirror. I have 6. That's what she could get, 6. I didn't have the megawatt, couldn't own it. So, but I had the fragrance. Once I even panicked when Guerlain said they were going to discontinue the fragrance, and I called people all over the country and all over the world, and I started hoarding the stuff. But then it was later reissued at a later date. Fortunately, I had enough to get me through. And then I started working for a guy who was once deemed the worst boss in America, and he banned us all from wearing any fragrance in the office. So that was the end of that. But there's the beautiful little Le Bleu story, which I treasure. Another story, which had to do with my identification as a mom and the city that I love, was about running the marathon. Here's my marathon badge from 1994. The story actually takes place in 1992 when I ran my first one. And there's a sad ending to the story, but I'll read it to you now. I ran my first marathon in 1992, but if I'm talking to someone who says they ran a marathon, I'm reluctant to say me too. I was fit and well-trained and pumped up on New York City's enthusiasm, and I hadn't planned on really running the 26.2 miles, but New York revved up on its own adrenaline, and there were 50,000 plus runners that day to be moving as a single muscle. So I was determined to keep moving with them. I was still jittery, and it propelled me to go see the running shrink. Now, let me hold the story for a minute and let you know that at the marathon, they have these psychologists or psychiatrists stationed there in case people sort of freak out about what's about to happen. Let me get back to the story. The running shrink. He was positioned in a tent near the porta potties, and I talked to him about how anxious I was and said I didn't feel I could make it to the finish, that I would just drop out. That would be okay. He looked me in the eye and said that very few people drop out. And then he cut a piece of the pink tape. This is before they did the marathon digitally. He cut a piece of this tape and he pinned it to the bottom of my t-shirt. And he said, I should touch, if I feel like I'm going to drop out, I should touch the tape. And I made my way to the starting line, holding on to that particular piece of tape because I wasn't going to break the city's stride. And I chugged along mile after mile. admiring the grace and the beauty of other runners, elite runners, and I was really chugging along. But I got myself through Brooklyn, which seemed to be effortless. And at this point in my life, I didn't have a body that really could effortlessly run a marathon. I have very thin legs and I have a very big belly, and it sort of looked like a lollipop. But I kept holding onto that shrinks tape till the very end of the run. Along the course of the marathon, on every street, people kept giving me things, and they were pleased to see me. I wore this very homemade t-shirt, you can see it here, has Julia's mom on the front and Ben's mom on the back. And as I ran through the streets, people kept calling my name. They were cheering on Julia and Ben's mom. New way, a wonderful way of identifying myself. My dream had always been to be a strong amateur athlete. I was living my Chariots of Fire fantasy. I was flying, in my head at least, and sharing the energy with other runners powered by the crowds lining the streets. Hundreds of hands along the marathon route reached out for support, water, Gatorade, and Tootsie Rolls, and I couldn't say no to every Tootsie Roll that was handed to me. I finished the day with my medal, the shrinks tape, my number, my t-shirts, my pictures. I have it all stored in a little box at home. And I wrote an article for the Daily News about all of this. And the opening line of that article, here's the sad part, folks. The opening line was, how many women can actually say they gained weight while running the New York Marathon? Yep, I burned 1,000 calories running those streets, but I ate Tootsie Rolls the entire way through. I still managed to gain weight. And I said in the piece, I had no regrets, but to tell you the truth, I was lying, I did. So that's a story about being identified as a mother. The next story I want to read, and this will be, let me see, I have two more quick ones to read to you. This story is about this object. This book is called Puella Mea. The book was actually stolen by my first boyfriend. He stole it from a library. I'm not going to mention his name or the library from which he stole it. And he stole it because he wanted me to have this poem. And the piece is called Disappear the Fantasy, Keep the Memory. My first serious boyfriend was everything my mother wanted for me. Jewish and studying to be a doctor. We dated for a number of years when I was in college, and he gave me this little book, Puella Mea, by E. Cummings. It had drawings in it by Paul Klee, Modigliani, and Picasso. The book had been written by Cummings for his wife. It was a love letter to his wife. And it had the line, keep your beautiful, dead, beautiful ladies. Mine is a little lovelier than any of your ladies were. I was 20 at the time and really wondered if my boyfriend at the time loved me more than he loved poetry, literature, and loved the idea of being a thief. So that's Puella Mea. And the last story I want to read to you today, and I don't have the object, is about these shoes from Manolo Blahnik, Sex and the City shoes. The story is called Killer Heels. My feet are not so wonderful. I have flat feet, bunions, narrow heels, Morton's and aroma. Shoes have always been a challenge, beginning at the age 5. After I saw Cinderella, the movie, I got a pair of souvenir glass slippers, one slipper, and of course it didn't fit. And when I was anointed editor-in-chief of Self, I received a clothing allowance and bought a signature Caroline Manolo Blahnik set of pumps, which were named after Carolyn Rome. The pumps lived up to their promise of comfort and style. It was really wonderful to have this. One day, to save time walking from Lexington Avenue to Madison Avenue, I took a shortcut through Grand Central Station. And as I was climbing the stairs at 44th and Vanderbilt to get to the Condé Nast building, the heel of one of my Manolos landed in something soft, a New York City rat. It was not pretty, but discreetly I shook my leg and the rat fell loose and slowly hobbled off. I soldiered on up the stairs to my job in the chicest shoes with the chicest people in New York City. So that's a sample of what the book was like. I call the book Plan A. And next, a proposal was put together and it was sent to my agent, by my agent to publishers. Now, coming from the publishing industry, people were very kind to me. And a number of people expressed interest, but they wanted me to focus on celebrities, people like the Halle Berrys, the Richard Avedons, the Barbara Streisands, the Al Gores, the Halstons. They wanted me to publish on that. I had my doubts. Some publishers were prescriptive, more of how to deal with problems that I had, phobias that I had, the incessant worrying that I had. And I gave it a good try. I tried to reshape the project. Barbara was there every step of the way trying to help me. How was I going to reshape this? It was like trying to fit me into a size 2 dress. It wasn't me and it wasn't going to happen. So I had to question my intention about this entire project. Vanity, yep, it was vanity. I wanted to be seen for who I was, and I looked in the mirror and I got to see someone who was older, someone who was white, someone who's sometimes funny, someone who worries a lot, someone who's grateful to be born here, someone who has a good family, and someone who's learned some things along the way that could be worth sharing. But I didn't fit the publisher's needs. And maybe the book wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't good enough. And so I took a nosedive, got a little depressed, and of course I ate, always too much, because I always eat, whether I'm happy or sad, doesn't matter. I remembered a lesson from Jim Henson, from that wonderful book, When I Worked on the Works. And when I worked on the works, this book, the Henson people told me, Henson had just died during that time, but people told me that his greatest gift in all of this that they learned was his resiliency. They used to call him Mr. Bounce Back. And so I decided I could do that. I could bounce back. And I went with Barbara, thank God, to Plan B. One more thing before we get to Plan B. I want to tell you about something that Kurt Vonnegut once said while he was giving advice to a high school class. He had gotten a letter from a high school class. They had written letters to a lot of writers around the country for advice. And Vonnegut, by the way, was the only one who answered them. And he gave the kids an assignment. And the assignment was to write a 6-line poem about anything. Just make it rhyme, he said. Make it as good as you could make it. Don't tell anybody what you're doing. Don't show it to anybody, not your friend, not your teacher, no one. Okay. That was his advice. And I thought this was great advice, especially when starting Plan B. Just start, because starting will free you, will get you out of the hole that I was in. So now I was going to be bounce back. Bounce back was the second start. Before I started anything, while finishing something, at work or anything that I was working on, I would do a post-mortem. As I worked on as an editor or as a marketer, I had to understand what worked and what didn't work. I had to understand the audience, and in this case, the audience were publishers. And publishers, I knew that publishers need to make money. They put money into production, they put money into editing, and they put money into promotion. So what was the return for them? I had to understand and deal with that. They were in business. They were in the book business. And sometimes our businesses could meet and sometimes they don't. So today, a big part of a guaranteed draw for sales to meet that bottom line is having a huge social media following. Mine was clearly minimal. And although a lot of people who look like me buy a lot of books, I didn't know how I was going to reach them. So I asked myself, if I were the publisher and I had to make an investment to meet a bottom line, especially if I was a public company, given the demand for incessant social media numbers, could I become the next shameless lady out there? Could I do something like that to build up those numbers? And remember, I'm the kid from the Bronx with the parents who came from Belarus and Ukraine that needed to lay low and stay under the rock, because if you were too visible, you might get killed. So it led me to my second bounce back, which was personal brainstorming. When I was at Condé Nast, I worked on a campaign for them called Content Comes First. And what I'm saying now may seem obvious to you, but 30 years ago, saying that content could be delivered in any form, whether it's print, digital, film, was not so easily understood. I had started their web company 30 years ago with Epicurious, and that was wave making for me and for them, but it was hard. It was a big push. I had worked on films, I had worked on commercials, I had delivered content in many forms, but that's not what the publishing industry was looking for. I was rewarded for a lot of content. I was rewarded both with literal awards and associations and with dollars and cents. So could I show up for me? I was now the content. How was I going to deliver it? Well, the first thing I always do, as you know, is I make a chart. I do an inventory. What did I have? I had some stories. I had quotes from people. I had happy color. I had photographs, and I had objects that related to the story. If I was going to go digital, what else would be available to me? I had an opportunity here, and it offered me to use bits and pieces of things and put them together in animation. And if it didn't slow down, that would be good. So I wanted to minimize that. The thing that was a blessing going digital was distribution. A site could be easier to make available to everyone. It didn't require the printing, the delivery, the shelving of all of this product. And I could get it and share it with whoever I wanted to. And you're here today as proof of the ability to be able to share this content. I had to keep it easy. And I wanted it to be a little less stress-free. I wanted it to be stress-free and less troublesome because I'm not so digitally savvy. But the content could be never ending. And this led me to what else I could include. And I thought about other things that occurred in my lifetime that began to help me understand who I am. And one of those people was a guy by the name of Fernando Flores. Flores was the Minister of Finance under Allende in Chile. He was a political prisoner of Pinochet, and I met Flores as a result of efforts through Amnesty International. And he was a guy who worked for top companies all over the world. He was instrumental in how ATMs were worked. And so when you think about this, go back 30 years. If you requested money from a machine, he was the guy who figured out the language that you could use to get the money out. He used to say that we're all born with a biology and we're all born into a culture. Whether we accept that biology or whether we accept that culture, that's up to us. The one thing that we had was that we could language ourselves. We had control over our language. Think back to the opening of my remarks about Salman Rushdie, about words being the victors. This is very, very powerful. And I knew Flores's thinking was important. So I wanted to include some cultural impact on the site I was building. Like what was happening in the world. And so when you go through the site, you'll see little entr'actes, little sections that say, while I was working or when I was born, this was happening in the world. And Barbara was very instrumental in finding a lot of these things, and we worked on them together. And you'll be able to see them as you go through the site. There's also another section in the site that speaks to the impact of culture and life on us. And that's a section called 5 Boxes. And it really parallels Maslow's pyramid of needs. What else could I put into this? I could put in pictures of people I worked with. People like Milton Glaser, who I loved and adored, the man who started I Love New York. I took a night school class with him and ended up being an assistant at New York Magazine when I was born out of the Herald Tribune. So I knew that I could include a lot of people like that. And the other thing that I wanted to include were a lot of the questions that I asked myself as I wrote through the book. So questions were added as well. But I had to think about how to combine photographs and text. Now, Illustration had always been included in text. You think of the Book of Kells, it goes back forever and ever, but this was photography. And in school, I was introduced to a lot of books that combined photography and words really well. Probably the best known of these is Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, which I'm sure a number of you are familiar with. It's the book by James Agee, or AAG, as some people call him. He wrote the text and Walker Evans did the photographs. And it was about the Depression. And it was a great book because he said that the photographs were as important as the experience of reading his words. I also became familiar with a book of Larry Sultane's work. For those of you who don't know Larry Sultane, he did a book about 10 years. He took about 10 years to do a book called Pictures from Home. He photographed and interviewed his parents, both in audio and film, of course, with their permission, because he wanted to understand himself and he wanted to put it all together. Now, today, the playwright, Char White, has turned that book into an incredible performance piece. It's a play at the theater at Studio 54, and it's going to have a short run. And I just have to tell you, I'm going to be a cheerleader for this now. If you can get a ticket to see this show, get a ticket to see this show. It's astounding. Nathan Lane plays the father, Danny Burstein the son, and Zoe Wanamaker the mother. It's brilliant. It's poignantly acted, and it will have you laughing and thinking about yourself. It will raise questions in your life to think about how you want to be able to put together your words, or how you could think about reading other people's words. So now I had my pictures, I had my words, I had a delivery and distribution system, and I had people I wanted to include, and I had to find a way of combining them. So I needed to look for a digital team. And I reached out to my daughter-in-law, Grace Bondi, who had a site for many years called Design Sponge. And so she led me to a wonderful team. And I handed them stories that Barbara and I put together. I handed them my palette. I handed them piles of photographs. I'm just going to take a second and show you what I handed them, because it was a real mishmash. I handed them things that looked like this. You can see the insanity of this. It's real old school, but it was how I got to think about the project. And I handed them with the spiel. I told them about plan A. I told them about plan B. I told them I had been hit by the medicine ball many times, and I got hit by the medicine ball this time. But I'm really happy to be surprised with what they do. And I gave them sketches of what to do. But I told them if they just only follow my sketches, this project will remain very, very small. They needed to tell me what they were thinking, and they did. And Barbara and I both had a wonderful experience with them because we developed trust within the team. And we laughed a lot because I'm very frazzled by technology. They saw my sketches and they asked me to draw because they wanted my hand to touch the site. So I started drawing these funny little things all the time, and they started to include them actually on the site, those drawings that you'll see. The other thing that I kept vacillating on was what to call this. And they came up, and it's called Adventures of the Baker's Daughter, but they came up with this rotating thing. If you go to the site, you'll see the adventures of, and it would become the adventures of what? A hopeless balabusta, or an information junkie, or a dog lover. And there are about 15 to 20 of those rotating along in a very seamless kind of animation. The team made it better every step of the way because we talked, we understood each other, and we respected everybody's contributions to each other. The question to ask is, who do you want to spend your time with? Well, I have to tell you, I wanted to spend my time with them, with Barbara, with Lena, with Jenny, with Steve, and of course, my husband. And if you're interested in learning more about teams, there are some good books available for that, Making Movies or Organizing Genius. They're available and they're great. Next, I had to get the stories out of my head, out of Barbara's head, and we started to literally begin to shift these into things that were digital. I want to offer one other piece of advice about writing all of this down. And it comes from, again, Kurt Vonnegut. He calls the writing down that he wanted those kids to do in that homework assignment, he called it becoming, because he said, becoming is finding out what's inside of you. And so we did a lot of becoming on this project, all of us together. 3 of the 4 sections on the site also have questions, and they served as prompts for stories. And I suggest that that might be a helpful tip for all of you who are interested in moving ahead with something like this. Like, was my arrival a burden or a joy? You can read the story, but it's based on the fact that I was a baby that was born after another child had died. And I always thought of myself as a replacement part. But I learned going through the process, reading tapes of that had been made of my mother, why I was feeling this way. And I had been using it as an excuse for a long time. And so I really began to empathize with what my mother had gone through as she was leaving Ukraine. In the section in Finding My Place, I asked the question, are you your hair? And I actually am my hair. I'm a little bit crazy with my hair, but I wanted to look like somebody else. I wanted to be very waspy looking. But actually what I look like, my hair looks like most of the time like 2 hollows on the side of my head, big, heavy hair like braids. I wanted to look like, here's me as a kid with the 2 hollows on the side of my head. But this is what I wanted to look like. I wanted to be like CZ Guest. It's never going to happen, never going to happen. So in the process of it, I learned about that. And I continue to ask the questions like, am I the fattest person in the room? And even outside of the site, I began to explore this question with my daughter, who has been also exploring and explaining diet culture to me, and busted through that with her saying, you know, Mom, you're not alone. You're not alone in this. And that gave me a lot of comfort to know that I wasn't alone. So with that, you get examples of putting together stories, using objects as visuals, using quotes to enhance. Finding good partners is a gift, and I suggest that you talk to people should you want to be able to do this. But before I close on this section, I want to tell you one more story, and it takes place outside of the site, the memoir. On December 11th, about 6 weeks ago, I received a text from my son early in the morning, and it said something like, hey, Mom, have you received an email from 23andMe? I said, yeah, I get them all the time. I don't open them. Well, he opened his. Both Ben and I got gifts to 23andMe 20 years ago. They were gifts to us. He said he opened it and he had gotten a notice from a guy who was 57 years old, and that they were related and they were cousins. And it was a 26% match, which is a significant number. Ben, who's an amazing researcher, sent the picture of the man to me, and the man had a really familiar look. And Ben looked up my 23andMe and email. He helped me do that. And I had a slightly larger DNA match with this guy. So as the unrelenting researcher, Ben continued to text with him during the day. And it was revealed that this guy knew who his father was. The name was on the birth certificate, but the birth mother was not listed. The man's wife encouraged him to pursue this, both for his own well-being, psychological well-being, and for health reasons. He always knew, this man always knew that he was adopted. And I'm not going to mention his name because I haven't actually had this conversation with him that I'm talking about it, but I'm talking about it now. So I'm going to want to maintain that. So now I'm going to tell you a family secret. One of my sisters, who already had 3 sons, little boys, and she was a young working mother. Her first husband had died, the father of the 3 sons. She had remarried and was recently divorced from this man, her rebound second husband. And she delivered a baby. And that baby was given up for adoption. That was 57 years ago. My sister, who is she's deceased now, she is a very voluptuous woman, was able to hide her pregnancy and never spoke of it. I was 21 at the time, so of course I knew the story, but I had no reason to share it. She kept gaining baby weight, but losing body weight. And so, not knowing anyone out there, it was something that I had kept to myself. So later that afternoon, at about 2 o'clock, my son arranged for this lovely man to have a Zoom with us. And my husband sat with me for support. And this wonderful 57-year-old man and his wife, because he needed her for support, got on the Zoom together. Thank you, Zoom. And within 10 minutes of a 90-minute phone call, we were definitely related. And he said to me, he'd love to learn more of the family. So I sent him a link to Adventures of the Baker's Daughter. And now I'm ready to take your questions. Are there any questions?
Yes. We have a question in the chat, Rochelle, and the question is, what do you know about yourself now that you didn't before starting this book?
I know a lot more about myself. I always vacillated between the world of celebrities and wondered if there was something wrong with me that I really didn't want to be on a first name basis with celebrities. When I was growing up, celebrities had first and last names, you know? It was Marlon Brando. It was Marilyn Monroe. And because of things like People magazine, we were brought into their homes and we were on a first name basis with them. And the thing that I learned over the years was that they were people too, but it haunted me that I was not caught up in sort of the celebrity hoo-ha. And during the process of this, I came to terms with that's fine, that's great, it's wonderful for people, terrific, but it's not something that I felt I needed to engage with. And I felt much more comfortable being low key about that. I hope that answers the one of the things I learned a lot of things. I learned to really enjoy food. I really learned, this started as a diet project. I love to eat, and I really have learned in the process of it to take pleasure in what I was eating and not be so panicky about, that it's sugar or it's whatever it is, that maybe, butter. I mean, everything's better with butter. It's great. But for health reasons, yes, obviously moderation would be good. I became much more moderate in my eating, by the way, as a result of sort of not feeling panicked about what I was putting into my mouth. I still, if I hold up a fork, I assess the value of what's going in there, but I'm not panicked about it the way I used to be. Any other questions?
Yes. Rosie asks, how does someone thinking about writing a memoir overcome the thought of who would want to read about my life? Have you ever had that doubt?
Oh my God, yes, absolutely. Thank you, Rosie, for that question. I actually still have that doubt. But I decided, I just wanted to put it, I really needed to put it down. And I really, through the process of it, realized the universality of who we all are and how we touch each other. And it's important. And given the opportunities that I've had, especially in the business world, I think that there's a lot of lessons to learn about working with people, about understanding marketplaces like the women's marketplace. Barbara and I did a lot of work together in the women's marketplace about realizing how important and valuable and economic power women had and voices women had, and mobilizing that. And that's an important thing. So being able to put it down and say to the world, you know what, hey, you know, if you want some more information about this, we can talk about it. Maybe what you read about it might be helpful to you. I have to say one thing. A lot of people have known me for the work I did on Calvin Klein. I was the person who put together What Comes Between Me and My Calvins. This is something, if that came, you know, God knows how many years ago. I mean, Brooke Shields was 15 at the time when she said that line. She's now in her 50s. So you know how many years that is. I regret that. If it was today, that line wouldn't have existed. I confess.
There's another question from Sheila who asks, I have always wanted to write a novelized version of my life, youth, but was leery about telling the truth. The reason? It would shock children, mine and my friends. What can you say about that? I have writer friends. I am a writer.
Sheila, I got to tell you, if I were to start writing some of those celebrity stories, that would not be healthy for the planet. Best to keep them to myself. You could buy me a drink and dig it out of me, but best to keep it to myself.
There was a question too that I think was also answered, but I'll go back to make sure. You had mentioned a show with Nathan Lane, and somebody wanted the name of the show again, and then Joyce answered the play is called Pictures with Home, I think. That's
yes,
correct.
It is Pictures from Home. It's wonderful. I can't, it's just great. I love the theater. I love good theater, but I love the theater. I think that it's important that we have theater. I think it's important that we have art. I think it's really important that we have music. Barbara and her husband, Jeff, make wonderful music, fun music. It's great. It's important. I mean, we can do that as human beings to express ourselves and share that. I think it's great. Go see Pictures from Home. Studio 54 Theater.
I don't have any other questions in the chat. Is there anyone who would like to unmute themselves and ask a question?
I thank you all. There's a lot that I threw out here today. I hope it was useful to some of you. And I appreciate all of you being here. So have a good evening. Have the good rest of the week. The weekend's coming up. Have a fun one. Thank you all.
Hold on, Rochelle. I would like everybody to unmute so we can give Rochelle a round of applause for this.
Thank
Unmute
you.
yourself so she can hear you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Rochelle.
Beautiful job.
Bravo.
Rochelle, thank you so much. We will never forget you as our first. And this was lovely and comfortable and everything we could have wanted. And I bet they could build a whole Jeopardy show around everything you said.
Oh, and I just want to add one thing, Rochelle. I just saw that Brooke Shields has a documentary out at Sundance Film Festival, all about the things you were talking about. So you don't have to feel guilty because she's getting her chance to feel okay.
She worked through it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.